Tonight, let your heart rest as we journey through the final book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. It is a vision whispered to John on a quiet island long ago, where heaven opened, mysteries were revealed, and the future of all things was gently unfolded. This is not a story of fear, but of hope, not of endings, but of a new beginning. From the letters to the 7 churches, to the throne of heaven, to the Lamb who is worthy, to the promise of a new heaven and a new earth, this story carries you like a gentle river through scenes of wonder and peace. Stay with me until the very end, and discover how the last page of Scripture is really the first page of eternity. Hello, my dear friend, and welcome. I am so glad you are here with me tonight. Before we begin our peaceful journey through one of the most mysterious and beautiful books of the Bible, I want to ask you a gentle question. Where are you listening from right now? Are you resting at home? Or perhaps in another quiet place far away? And what time is it where you are? I love knowing where each of you are joining from, because it reminds me that though we are scattered across the world, we are all coming together in this moment, listening to the same story, breathing in the same peace, and sharing in the same gentle rest. If you have not already, please feel welcome to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you love. It helps so much, and it makes sure you can find many more stories like this one. I have also prepared a playlist in the description below with other calming Bible stories that flow together with this one, so that you can listen for as long as you need, perhaps the whole night if you wish, without needing to lift a finger. Now, I invite you to make yourself comfortable. Lay your head down softly, loosen your shoulders, and let the worries of the day fall quietly aside. This is your time of rest, your time of peace. Tonight we will open the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. Though many have read it with trembling or with fear, tonight we will walk through it gently, like a slow journey along a moonlit path. We will listen with the ears of wonder. We will see with the eyes of calm, and we will receive it not as a burden, but as a gift of hope. Let us begin with the man through whom this vision came. His name was John. He was a disciple of Jesus, one of the 12 who followed the Lord during his ministry on earth. John was known as the disciple whom Jesus loved, the one who leaned on him at the Last Supper, the one who stood at the foot of the cross when nearly all others had fled. By the time this story begins, John was no longer young. Many years had passed since those days when he walked with Jesus through the towns of Galilee and Jerusalem. He had preached, he had taught, and he had seen the Church of Christ grow across the Roman world. But John was also a man under watchful eyes. The Roman Empire in those days was not kind to Christians. Their loyalty to Christ was seen as disloyalty to Caesar. Their refusal to worship the gods of Rome marked them as different, strange, and dangerous. And so John, faithful to the very end, faced persecution. Tradition tells us that he was exiled to the small rocky island of Patmos, far away from the bustling cities, far away from the people he loved. Can you imagine John there, on that island? The sea stretched endlessly in all directions, waves rising and falling in steady rhythm. The shore was rough, and the land itself offered little comfort. Yet there, in that place of solitude, John was not forgotten. He was not alone. For even in exile, God was preparing to open heaven itself to his faithful servant. Picture it with me. The evening air cool and still, the sound of the sea whispering softly against the stones, the sky deepening into a dome of stars, each one a silent flame above the waters. John, an old man now, perhaps leaning on his staff as he walked along the shore, his body aged, but his spirit alive with devotion, his mind lingering on the memories of Christ, the voice of his teacher, the touch of his hand, the sight of his glory on the mountain, the agony of his death, and the wonder of his resurrection. It was on such an island, in such solitude, that John received a vision unlike any other. He was not expecting it. He was simply in the Spirit, worshipping on the Lord's day, as he had done countless times before. But in that moment, the veil between heaven and earth grew thin. The ordinary became extraordinary. The silence of Patmos broke open with the sound of a voice that rolled like the ocean yet rang like a trumpet. John turned. His heart trembled within him. And there, before his eyes, stood the beginning of the vision that would fill the last book of the Bible. But before we step too quickly into the vision itself, let us pause and linger with John on Patmos a little longer, because here is something gentle and true. God often meets his people not in the places of comfort, but in the places of exile, not in the crowded cities, but in the lonely wilderness, not in the height of triumph, but in the quiet of waiting. And for John, exile was not the end. It was the doorway to revelation. Think of the island again. During the day, sunlight would spill across the rocks, warming the earth beneath John's feet. Small plants clung to the soil, surviving in the dry wind. The sea would sparkle like glass, each wave a moving jewel. Birds circled in the sky, their wings catching the light. At night, the island grew still, and the heavens opened above with 1,000 stars. For John, every sight and sound was a reminder that even in exile, creation still spoke of its creator. The sea still obeyed its maker. The stars still burned with his light. It was on such a day, set apart for worship, that John's life shifted forever. He had perhaps risen early, his heart turned toward prayer. He might have remembered the Psalms, words he had prayed all his life. Perhaps he whispered, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Or maybe he simply closed his eyes and listened to the rhythm of the sea, letting his heart rest in the presence of God. And then, suddenly, the stillness was broken. A sound came, a voice, strong and clear, not like any earthly sound. It was like a trumpet calling from behind him, commanding his attention, yet filled with majesty and strength. This was the beginning of a vision that would carry John into the very courts of heaven, into the heart of God's plan, into the mysteries of the ages. As we prepare to follow him there, I want you to imagine the moment with gentleness. John was not a young man filled with restless energy. He was an old man, weary in body but strong in spirit. And when the voice came, he did not run or flee. He turned, slowly, his eyes opening wide to behold what no mortal had ever seen in such fullness. The waves still broke on the shore, The stars still shone in the night. But for John, the island of Patmos had been transformed. It was no longer merely a place of exile. It had become holy ground. This is how Revelation begins, with a man alone on an island, with the sea around him, with the stars above him, with his heart lifted in worship, and with the sudden breaking in of a vision from God that would echo through every generation to come. So, as you listen, I invite you to breathe deeply and let this opening picture settle into your mind. The old disciple, faithful and steadfast. The quiet island, shaped by the waves. The voice, strong and clear. The veil between heaven and earth beginning to open, and the story of Revelation gently beginning, not with fear, but with promise. When John turned toward the voice that called to him, he beheld a sight that filled him with awe. Standing in the midst of 7 golden lampstands was one, like a son of man. The light around him was not harsh or blinding, but radiant, glowing with the calm strength of eternal majesty. His robe flowed long, reaching to his feet, and a golden sash lay across his chest, shining with pure brilliance. John's eyes took in every detail, and though the vision was unlike anything he had ever seen, it carried with it a sense of deep peace. The hair of this one was white, pure as wool and bright as snow, speaking of wisdom older than the ages and purity without stain. His eyes were like flames of fire, not burning in anger, but glowing with piercing clarity, seeing through all shadows and bringing light where darkness once hid. His feet shone like bronze refined in a furnace, steady and unshakable, carrying the weight of eternal authority. And his voice, oh, his voice, was like the sound of many waters. Imagine the ocean when it rises in power, wave upon wave, rolling endlessly toward the shore. That was the sound that reached John's ears. Yet instead of fear, it brought assurance, like a mighty strength that could never be overcome. In his right hand he held 7 stars, held firmly and safely, and from his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, the living word that divides truth from falsehood. His face shone like the sun in all its brilliance, a light so pure that no darkness could endure it. Overwhelmed, John fell at his feet as though lifeless. The vision was too great, too majestic for human strength. Yet immediately the hand of the one he saw reached out and touched him. It was not the hand of judgment, but the hand of comfort. And the voice that spoke was gentle, though filled with power. Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. I hold the keys of death and of the grave. The words calmed John's spirit. This was no stranger. This was the Lord whom he had known, the Christ whom he had followed, now glorified beyond measure, yet still full of compassion. He who had walked the dusty roads of Galilee, who had spoken words of mercy, who had touched the sick and raised the dead, was now revealed in his heavenly majesty. And yet his heart was unchanged. He still bent low to comfort his servant. The vision continued. The Lord explained that the 7 stars were the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 golden lampstands were the churches themselves. These were the communities of believers scattered across Asia Minor, shining as lights in the world. And now Christ, their Lord, walked among them, watching, guiding, and speaking words of both encouragement and correction. The first message was for the church in Ephesus. John listened carefully as the voice spoke. The believers in Ephesus had labored faithfully. They had endured hardships, tested false teachers, and held firmly to truth. Yet one thing was missing. Their first love had grown dim. They had forgotten the fire of devotion that once burned brightly in their hearts. The Lord called them gently back, urging them to remember, to repent, and to return to the love they had at first. The message was not harsh, but tender, like a shepherd calling his sheep home. To the one who overcame, the promise was given, the right to eat from the tree of life in the paradise of God. The next words were for the church in Smyrna. To them, Christ offered comfort in their suffering. They faced poverty and affliction, yet in his eyes they were rich. Some would be tested, even imprisoned, but they were told not to fear. Be faithful unto death, he said, and I will give you the crown of life. His words were steadying, like an anchor in the storm, reminding them that their faithfulness would never be forgotten. Then the Lord spoke to the church in Pergamum. They lived in a place where evil was strong, yet they had not denied his name. Still, some among them were drawn into false teaching, tempted by idols and impurity. Christ called them back with firmness, but also with hope. To those who overcame, he promised hidden manna and a white stone with a new name written on it, a name known only to the one who received it, a sign of intimacy and eternal belonging. To the believers in Thyatira, the Lord offered words of both praise and warning. Their love, faith, service, and perseverance had grown stronger over time, but they were tolerating false teaching that led some astray. Christ's eyes of fire saw the truth. He called them to hold fast, to cling to what was right until he came. And to those who endured, he promised authority to share in his victory, even as he had received authority from the Father. The voice then turned to the church in Sardis. They had a reputation for being alive, but in truth they were near to death. Their works were incomplete, their faith hollow. Yet even here, hope was not lost. Christ urged them to wake up, to strengthen what remained, to remember and obey the truth they had once received. And for the few who had remained faithful, he promised that they would walk with him in white, for they were worthy. To the church in Philadelphia, Christ spoke only words of encouragement. They had little strength, yet they had kept his word and had not denied his name. Before them lay an open door that no one could shut. Though opposition surrounded them, Christ assured them of his love and promised to keep them from the hour of trial. To those who held firm, he promised a place in the temple of God, never to leave it, and a new name written upon them, marking them forever as his own. Lastly, the voice addressed the church in Laodicea. They were neither hot nor cold, but lukewarm, self-satisfied, and blind to their true need. Christ spoke firmly yet tenderly, calling them to realize their poverty, their nakedness, and their blindness, and to come to him for true riches, white garments, and healing ointment for their eyes. His words were not rejection but invitation, for he said, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him, and he with me. And to those who overcame, he promised a place with him on his throne, just as he had overcome and sat with his Father on his throne. John listened to each word, his heart steady beneath the weight of the vision. 7 churches, 7 messages, each one filled with truth, correction, and encouragement. Through them all, one truth remained constant. Christ was present among his people. He knew their works, their struggles, their failures, and their faith, and he cared for them deeply, walking among the lampstands, holding the stars in his hand, guiding his church with both firmness and love. The vision was majestic yet calming, for in the midst of all the trials of the world, John saw clearly that Christ was alive, reigning, and caring for his people. The 7 churches stood not alone in their struggles. They were held, known, and guided by their Lord. The voice concluded with a call. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. These words, though spoken to 7 communities long ago, reached across time to every listener, every believer, every soul who longs to follow the Lamb. And so the vision of Christ among the lampstands came to John, radiant and full of glory, yet also filled with compassion and care. The eyes like fire, the voice like many waters, the hand stretched out in comfort, the words spoken to the churches, all were given to strengthen, to guide, and to prepare the people of God for what was yet to be revealed. After John received the words spoken to the 7 churches, the vision before him shifted. What he had just witnessed, the radiant Christ, walking among the lampstands, had filled his heart with awe and reassurance. But now a new scene opened before him, more glorious than anything his eyes had ever beheld. He writes that after these things he looked, and there before him was a door standing open in heaven. Imagine it for a moment. Not a door made by human hands, not carved of wood or built of stone, but a doorway into the very heart of eternity. It stood open, not locked, not guarded, but waiting, and the same voice that had spoken to him like a trumpet now called again, saying, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once John was in the Spirit, lifted beyond the rocky island of Patmos into a realm of heavenly wonder. The sea and sky of his exile faded away, and before him unfolded a vision so pure and so radiant that words strain to hold its beauty. Yet John, faithful witness, set his heart to describe it. The first thing he saw was a throne set in heaven, and on the throne sat one whose appearance was like jasper and carnelian. The sight was not of form or feature as mortals might imagine, but of brilliance, of colour, of light. Jasper, clear and dazzling like crystal, and carnelian, glowing deep like flame, blended together in majesty. Around the throne shone a rainbow that gleamed like an emerald, soft and green, circling the throne in gentle radiance. The image was one of harmony, of light and colour interwoven, of strength and beauty resting together. It was not a scene to overwhelm, but to steady, a reminder that at the centre of all things there is a throne, and upon that throne sits the one who reigns with power, wisdom, and peace. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated upon them were 24 elders. They were clothed in white garments, pure and shining, and on their heads rested crowns of gold. Their presence was calm, ordered, and full of dignity. They represented the people of God, a completeness of number, a gathering of the faithful, now enthroned and sharing in the majesty of their King. Their garments spoke of righteousness, their crowns of victory, and their presence of fellowship with God. From the throne itself came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. Yet even these were not meant to terrify, but to remind of the majesty of the one who sits there. Before the throne burned 7 lamps of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God, shining brightly and eternally. And before the throne stretched a sea of glass, clear as crystal. Imagine the stillness of that sea, smooth and unbroken, reflecting the light of the throne in infinite calm. It was as though all chaos had been stilled, and all movement rested in perfect peace. Closest to the throne were 4 living creatures, unlike any earthly beings, yet full of meaning and majesty. The first was like a lion, noble and strong. The second was like an ox, steady and faithful. The third had the face of a man, wise and thoughtful. The fourth was like an eagle soaring in flight, swift and lifted high. Each was full of eyes, seeing in every direction, perceiving all things without limit. Each had 6 wings, and around and within they were alive with awareness, unceasing in vision and devotion. Day and night, without pause, these living creatures offered worship. Their song rose continually, pure and unending. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Their voices filled the heavens, their praise surrounding the throne in waves of reverence and awe. And whenever the living creatures gave glory, honor, and thanks to the one seated on the throne, the 24 elders responded. They rose from their seats, removed their golden crowns, and cast them before the throne, bowing low in worship. Their voices joined together, saying, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." Picture the scene again, slowly. At the center, the throne, radiant with jasper and carnelian. Around it, the soft emerald glow of a rainbow, circling in light. Before it, a sea like glass, calm and clear. Around it, 24 elders in white, their crowns gleaming. Closest to it, the living creatures, lifting their ceaseless song. Above it all, the light of eternal majesty, filling every space. There is no confusion here, no chaos, no unrest. Everything moves in harmony. Every part knows its place. Every voice is lifted in perfect accord. The living creatures sing. The elders respond. The throne shines with eternal glory. And John, caught up in the Spirit, beholds it all with wonder. For the weary exile, this vision was not merely beauty to behold, it was truth to anchor his soul. On Patmos he saw the sea restless, the empire strong, and the church fragile. But here, in heaven, he saw reality as it truly was. At the center of all, there is a throne, and that throne is not empty. It is not contested. It is not shaken. It is filled by the one who was and is to come. Around him all creation bows. From him all power flows. In him all things find their order and their peace. As John watched, the rhythm of worship continued without end. The living creatures lifted their voices, and the elders bowed. The crowns were laid down only to be lifted again, only to be cast down once more. It was a cycle of love, of reverence, of devotion, flowing endlessly like the waves of the sea. The colors of the vision glowed steadily, the emerald rainbow circling in peace, the sea of glass, unmoved and pure, the white garments, shining with righteousness, the golden crowns, gleaming with victory, the flames of the 7 lamps, burning with the fullness of God's Spirit. Each detail carried meaning, each sight revealed truth. Together, they formed a picture of harmony that filled John with quiet strength. And so the vision of the throne unfolded before him, majestic yet calming, radiant yet serene. He had seen the Christ walking among the churches, and now he saw the Father upon his throne, surrounded by worship and glory, eternal and unshakable. In that moment, John was reminded that though earthly thrones rise and fall, though kings rule and fade, there is one throne that endures forever. Though storms rage upon the sea, though empires boast of their power, there is one voice that commands all. Though the world seems fragile and uncertain, there is one center that cannot be moved. This was the vision given to John, and through him to all who would listen. Not to frighten, not to overwhelm, but to comfort, to steady, to assure. For at the heart of all things, beyond exile, beyond struggle, beyond fear, there is a throne in heaven, and one who sits upon it, holy and worthy, surrounded by unending worship. John lingered in the vision, his spirit soaking in the harmony of heaven. Every sound was pure, every sight filled with meaning, every movement in perfect balance. The voices rose, the crowns fell, the light shone, and the sea reflected it all. There was no night here, no shadow, no doubt, only the everlasting praise of creation to its Creator, and the unbroken majesty of the One enthroned forever. John's eyes were still fixed upon the throne, upon the glory and harmony that filled the heavenly vision. Yet as he looked, something new came into view. In the right hand of the one who sat upon the throne there was a scroll. It was written on both the inside and the outside, and it was sealed with 7 seals. The writing was full. Not a single space was left empty, as though every secret of history and eternity had been carefully recorded within. The seals, shining and unbroken, showed that no one had yet dared to open it. A mighty angel stepped forward, his voice rising like a trumpet, yet filled with solemn calm. He proclaimed, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" His words carried across the heavens, echoing through the sea of glass, across the elders, and among the living creatures. It was an invitation that reached everywhere, but silence followed. John looked around. No one in heaven, no one on earth, and no one under the earth could open the scroll or even look into it. The quiet was heavy. It was not the peaceful quiet of worship, but a pause filled with longing. What was written inside? What purpose of God was waiting to be revealed? Who could be trusted with so great a mystery? As the silence stretched, John felt sorrow welling up within him. His heart, tender from the vision he had already received, could not bear the thought that the scroll would remain closed forever. He began to weep, tears flowing as his spirit ached at the thought that the story of God's redemption would remain hidden, locked away by the seals. It was as if the hope of the world hung in that scroll, and without someone to open it, the fullness of God's plan would not be known. One of the elders, sitting close to the throne, leaned forward with gentle assurance. His voice was calm, carrying compassion and strength. He said, "Do not weep. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." The words stirred hope in John. He lifted his eyes, expecting to see a lion, strong and fierce, the conquering figure of ancient prophecy. Yet when he looked, he saw something altogether different. In the center of the throne, surrounded by the elders and living creatures, there stood a lamb. It bore the marks of having been slain, yet it was alive, standing, radiant, filled with quiet strength. The lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. The contrast was profound. The elder had spoken of a lion, the mighty king of beasts, but John saw a lamb, humble and gentle, carrying the signs of sacrifice. In that moment, John understood the mystery. The Lion of Judah had conquered, not through earthly power or force, but through giving his life. Christ, the Lamb of God, had triumphed over sin and death by laying himself down. This was the worthiness no one else could claim. The Lamb walked forward, calm and resolute, and took the scroll from the right hand of the One seated upon the throne. At that moment, all of heaven stirred with awe. The living creatures fell before the Lamb, and the 24 elders also bowed low. Each one held a harp, their strings ready to sing forth the praise of this worthy Lamb. They also held golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. Every whispered word of faith carried upward to God's presence. And then a new song began. The elders and creatures sang together, their voices clear and filled with joy. "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God people from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." The words poured like gentle waves, each line a reminder of what had been accomplished by the Lamb. His sacrifice was not only for one nation, not only for a small group, but for all people. Every language, every land, every family was included in his redemption, and through him they were lifted into a new identity, made into a kingdom and priests, drawn close to God, entrusted with his presence. As the song rose, John looked and saw that the circle of worship was expanding. Countless angels, more than the eye could measure, 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands upon thousands, joined their voices. They surrounded the throne, the living creatures, and the elders, forming a vast company of praise. Their voices filled the heavens like the sound of rushing waters. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise. Each word carried weight, a recognition of all that Christ deserved. Power was his, yet it was the power of love that overcomes hatred. Wisdom was his, the wisdom that confounds the proud and lifts the humble. Strength was his, shown most clearly in his willing sacrifice. Honor, glory, and praise belong to him forever. And still the song spread further. John heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them, joining together in perfect unity. Their voices rose as one, saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." The four living creatures, who had never ceased their worship, responded with a solemn Amen. And the elders fell down once more in reverence. The scene was complete, filled with harmony, beauty, and peace. The scroll, once hidden and sealed, was now held in the hands of the Lamb, the one who had shown himself worthy by his love. For John, the vision was a comfort beyond words. The weeping that had overtaken him moments before was lifted away, replaced by the assurance that God's plan would unfold through the Lamb. Nothing was beyond his reach, no seal too strong for his hand, no mystery too deep for his wisdom. All of heaven and earth bore witness to his worthiness. John gazed at the Lamb, remembering the gentle teacher he had followed by the shores of Galilee, the one who had called him from fishing nets into discipleship. He remembered the cross, the sorrow of that day, and the wonder of the empty tomb. And now he saw the same Christ, exalted in heaven, both lion and lamb, both king and sacrifice. The vision united every thread of the story, showing him the glory of the one he loved most. The scene of worship lingered, like a song that does not fade. Each voice, each harp, each word of praise became part of a greater chorus, drawing John deeper into the peace of God's eternal plan. The Lamb now held the scroll, and all of heaven watched with silent awe. The seals, 7 in number, still bound its contents, and the mystery within waited to be revealed. John fixed his gaze upon the Lamb, sensing that each seal would open like a layer of a dream, showing glimpses of what was to come. The Lamb reached forward and broke the first seal. At once, one of the 4 living creatures spoke with a voice that was clear and commanding, like the sound of thunder, yet steady enough to soothe. It said, "Come." John looked, and he saw a horse, white as new snow beneath a full moon. Its rider carried a bow and was given a crown. The horse moved with a grace that seemed unstoppable, and the rider went out to conquer. The vision did not roar with violence, but rather passed like a shadow across the sky, a symbol of power and conquest moving through the earth. It was a reminder that kingdoms rise and fall, that authority shifts, and that human history carries the mark of striving. Yet in this vision, it came like a cloud drifting overhead, a scene observed without fear, as though seen from a safe distance in the quiet of the night. The Lamb opened the second seal. Again the second living creature called out, "Come!" Another horse appeared, this one fiery red, glowing like embers. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people might turn against one another. The rider carried a great sword, though in John's vision it gleamed more like a symbol than a weapon. The scene was not given to overwhelm the heart, but to remind John that unrest and division often visit the earth. The red horse was a picture of conflict, yet here it came gently, as if drifting across a canvas of dream, leaving behind the thought that even when peace is shaken, the Lamb still holds the scroll, guiding all things in order. The Lamb broke the third seal, and the third living creature said, "Come." John looked again, and there before him was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand, the balance shifting carefully with each movement. A voice rose among the living creatures, speaking of the measure of wheat and barley, weighed and counted with care. It spoke of scarcity, of times when food is weighed by value, when daily needs are rationed. Yet the voice also said, "Do not harm the oil and the wine. Even in want there would be provision. Even in the leanest of seasons, God's care would not fail." The vision of the black horse was solemn, yet gentle in its telling, as though John were being shown the truth that life holds seasons of plenty and seasons of lack, yet all remain under the watchful eye of heaven. The Lamb broke the fourth seal, and the fourth living creature said, "Come." John lifted his eyes once more and saw a pale horse, its colour like faded light or the mist of dawn. Its rider was named Death, and the realm of the grave followed close behind. Authority was given over a portion of the earth, to bring trial through sword, famine, plague, and the wild creatures. Yet even this vision, sobering as it was, passed before John's eyes like a drifting cloud. It did not seize him with terror, but moved like a shadow that acknowledges the frailty of human life. The pale horse showed the truth that mortality is part of existence, yet it also carried the quiet reminder that death is not the end, for the Lamb is still standing at the center, holding the scroll. When the fifth seal was opened, the vision shifted. John saw beneath the altar the souls of those who had been faithful, those who had borne witness to God's truth even unto death. They were clothed in radiant calm, their voices rising together like a gentle song. They cried out, "How long, Sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the earth and avenge our blood?" Their words were not harsh but longing, like the deep sigh of hearts waiting for justice. Each one was given a white robe, soft and pure, a sign of rest and honor. They were told to wait a little longer, until the full number of their companions in faith should join them. Their waiting was not in despair, but in peace, like a restful pause before the fulfillment of promise. The Lamb then broke the sixth seal. John looked, and the vision became one of great shifting. The earth trembled, and the sun grew dark like cloth woven of rough fabric. The moon turned red like soft light seen through a veil. The stars seemed to fall from the heavens like blossoms shaken from a tree by the wind. The sky parted, rolling back like a scroll, and mountains and islands were moved from their places. Yet even in this majestic scene, John's heart was not filled with fear, for the vision unfolded like a dream that speaks in symbols. It was the imagery of creation responding to the hand of its maker, a reminder of the power of God above all things. Kings and rulers, the mighty and the small, all sought to hide themselves, calling to the mountains and rocks to cover them. They longed to be shielded from the face of the one who sat on the throne and from the Lamb. Their words spoke of the great day of God's presence, the day none could escape. Yet John knew, in the stillness of the vision, that those who belong to the Lamb are safe in his keeping. The seal was not given to terrify, but to reveal that God's justice and majesty embrace all creation. Then came a pause, a gentle silence between the opening of seals. John saw 4 angels standing at the corners of the earth, holding back the winds so that they would not blow upon the land or the sea or any tree. Another angel appeared, rising from the east, carrying the seal of the living God. He called to the 4 angels, saying, "Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have placed the seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God." John then heard the number of those sealed, 144,000, from all the tribes of Israel. Each tribe was named, 12,000 from each, sealed and secure. The vision was not one of exclusion but of completeness. 12 times 12, a symbol of wholeness. It was as if John were being shown that God's people are fully known, fully counted, and fully protected. After this, John looked again, and he saw a vast multitude that no one could number, from every nation, every tribe, every people, and every language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were clothed in white robes and held palm branches in their hands. Their voices rose together in one great chorus, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." All the angels stood around the throne and the elders and the living creatures, and they fell on their faces in worship. They said, "Amen. Praise and glory and wisdom and thanks and honor and power and strength be to our God forever and ever." "Amen," one of the elders asked John. "Who are these, clothed in white robes, and where have they come from?" John, humble and uncertain, replied, "Sir, you know." The elder answered, "These are they who have come out of great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. He who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. Never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." The vision was like a lullaby of eternal promise. The sealed ones were safe, and the great multitude was secure in joy, sheltered by the presence of the Lamb who shepherds with unfailing care. At last, the Lamb opened the 7th seal. When he did, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. The stillness was profound, deeper than words. like the quiet that falls at dawn when the world holds its breath before the light returns. The silence was not empty but full, carrying the weight of reverence. It was as if all creation paused together, awaiting what was to come next. Then John saw 7 angels standing before God, and they were given 7 trumpets. Another angel came and stood at the altar, holding a golden censer. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all God's people on the golden altar before the throne. The smoke of the incense rose with the prayers of the saints, drifting upward in a sweet and fragrant cloud before God. The prayers, every whispered plea, and every cry of hope were carried like incense into his presence, treasured and received. The vision of the seals was complete, each one opening like a step along a path, each scene filled with meaning. They were not shown to overwhelm, but to comfort, to remind John that every part of the story, even the trials and the sorrows, rests in the hands of the Lamb. And through it all, the prayers of the faithful rise like incense, never forgotten, never lost, always reaching the heart of God. The silence in heaven rested like a soft blanket, deep and unbroken, carrying the reverence of all creation. John watched as the 7 angels who stood before God were each given a trumpet. Their presence was steady, their posture filled with solemn purpose, as though the music of the trumpets would tell the next part of the story written in the scroll. Another angel approached the altar, carrying a golden censer filled with incense. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all God's people, and the fragrance rose in a cloud before the throne. The prayers and the incense mingled together, drifting upward in beauty. They were not hurried or forgotten, but treasured and lifted with care. John saw how every word of prayer, whispered in hope or spoken through tears, became part of this holy offering, filling heaven with a fragrance pleasing to God. When the angel had finished, he took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. John saw flashes of light, rumblings, and the low roll of thunder. The sound was not harsh, but carried the weight of divine presence, like distant storms that remind the heart of God's power. The 7 angels lifted their trumpets, ready to sound them one by one. Each trumpet would bring forth a vision, not as chaos but as symbols unfolding, dreamlike in their imagery, revealing the harmony of God's plan. The first angel sounded his trumpet. John saw hail and fire mixed with blood cast upon the earth. A third of the land was touched, a third of the trees, and all the green grass. The vision was vivid, yet it passed before John like a painted scene. It showed that even creation responds to the purposes of God. Yet the dreamlike tone carried reassurance, for John knew that nothing happened outside the Lamb's hand, and that even in judgment there was order, restraint, and purpose. The second angel sounded his trumpet. Something like a great mountain, burning with fire, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea became blood. A third of the creatures in the sea perished, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The scene was mighty, yet in John's vision it flowed like a vast painting, symbolic and filled with meaning. It was not given to him as terror, but as a reminder that even the deep waters of the world lie beneath the gaze of God. The sea, so often a symbol of chaos, was shown to be subject to his will. The third angel raised his trumpet and sounded it. A great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch. It fell upon a third of the rivers and springs of water. The star's name was Wormwood, and the waters it touched became bitter. Many people were harmed because the waters turned unfit to drink. The imagery was striking, yet John saw it as a vision within a dream, a way of showing how even the sources of life can become tainted when removed from God's hand. Yet the restraint remained, for it was not all waters but only part, reminding John that even trial is measured, and mercy remains present. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet. A third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a portion of the day was darkened, and the night as well. The vision painted a sky of dimmed light, like twilight spread across the heavens. The stars shimmered faintly, and the sun seemed veiled, a reminder of fragility in the rhythms of creation. Yet even in dimness, John saw beauty. The softened light was not frightening but tender, as if creation itself were bowing in reverence before its creator. Then John heard an eagle flying in mid-air, crying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth, because of the remaining trumpet blasts that the other angels are about to sound." The call was solemn, yet even this warning carried the weight of truth spoken in compassion. The fifth angel lifted his trumpet and sounded it. John saw a star that had fallen from heaven to earth, and to it was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. The shaft was opened, and smoke rose like the smoke of a great furnace. The sun and the air were darkened by the smoke. From the smoke came locusts, yet they were not like ordinary locusts. They were given power, but only to touch those without the seal of God on their foreheads. They did not kill, but only brought discomfort for a time. Their shapes were like horses prepared for battle, with crowns like gold, faces resembling humans, hair like women's, and teeth like lions. Their wings sounded like the rush of many chariots racing into battle, and their tails were like scorpions. Yet John did not describe them in terror, but as though he were watching a dream filled with symbols, each detail carrying meaning. They were led by a king, the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew was Abaddon, and in Greek Apollyon. The vision was strange, yet it did not linger in John's spirit as fear. Instead, it carried the reminder that those sealed by God remain safe and untouched, even when the earth trembles with trial. The sixth angel sounded his trumpet. John heard a voice from the golden altar before God, saying to the sixth angel, "Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." These angels were released, prepared for the very hour, day, month, and year, to bring trial upon a portion of humanity. The number of the mounted troops was vast, twice 10,000 times 10,000. John heard their number and described them as though seeing them in a vision of fire and smoke and sulphur issuing from their mouths. Their horses had heads like lions, and their tails were like serpents. Yet again the vision came not as a frightening force but as a symbolic dream. John knew it was a picture of the seriousness of God's justice, yet the dreamlike unfolding made it bearable, its edges softened, its message clear without terror. Even so, John noticed that many who experienced these signs did not turn their hearts. They continued in their ways, giving their devotion to idols and to the works of their hands. They did not repent of their violence or their impurities. This detail lingered gently, reminding John that even when God calls the earth to attention, the human heart can remain stubborn. It was not a vision meant to crush, but one meant to stir reflection, to show how grace waits even when many do not answer. The seventh angel held his trumpet, and the atmosphere deepened once more. Before it was sounded, John saw another vision. He saw a mighty angel coming down from heaven, robed in a cloud, with a rainbow above his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs like pillars of fire. In his hand was a little scroll, open. He planted his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and he gave a loud shout like the roar of a lion. When he shouted, the voices of 7 thunders spoke, but John was told not to write what they said. Some mysteries were to remain hidden. The angel lifted his hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever, who created the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, that there would be no more delay. In the days when the 7th angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants the prophets. John was told to take the little scroll from the angel's hand. He did so, and when he ate it, it was sweet in his mouth like honey, but bitter in his stomach. It was a symbol that God's word brings both sweetness and weight, joy and sorrow, hope and responsibility. Then came the moment of the 7th trumpet. When it sounded, loud voices filled heaven, saying, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever." The 24 elders fell on their faces and worshipped God, saying, "We give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, the one who is and who was, because you have taken your great power and begun to reign. The nations were angry, and your wrath has come. The time has come for judging the dead, and for rewarding your servants, the prophets, and your people, who revere your name, both small and great, and for destroying those who destroy the earth." Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and within his temple was seen the ark of his covenant. There came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and hail. Yet even these signs were wrapped in reverence and awe, like the majestic closing of a symphony, each sound echoing with meaning, reminding John that the story was still unfolding under the hand of the Lamb. John's vision continued to unfold, and the heavens opened before him once more. In this next scene, he saw a woman, radiant and clothed with the Sunday. Her light shone gently yet brilliantly, and the moon was beneath her feet, casting a calm reflection across her path. Upon her head rested a crown of 12 stars, not sharp or alarming, but shimmering like distant constellations in a clear night sky. She was with child, and the expectation of new life brought a serene joy to the vision. John watched as the warmth of her presence seemed to fill the heavens, a quiet beacon of hope and care. The woman's situation, though majestic, was not without tension. In the vision, a great red dragon appeared. Its 7 heads and 10 horns were described in the text, yet in John's sight it moved as a shadow in a dream. Its form was fierce in appearance, yet it did not strike fear into John's heart. Instead, it represented opposition, the forces of discord that always seem to arise against the work of God. The dragon's tail swept across the sky, attempting to reach the child, Yet even in the movement of threat, John saw the careful design of divine protection. The child, destined to rule all nations, was caught up to God and to his throne, safe in the hands of the one who watches over all creation. John then observed the woman fleeing into the wilderness, a place prepared by God, where she would be cared for and nourished for 1,260 days. Here, in this vision, the wilderness was not harsh or frightening, but a place of quiet refuge, a space where God's care was evident. Streams of comfort flowed invisibly, and the angelic presence ensured her safety. Even as opposition lurked nearby, the Lamb's oversight kept all in harmony, the rhythm of protection soft and steady. Next, John saw two beasts arise. The first came out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, each horn adorned with a crown. Its appearance was formidable, yet John perceived it as a symbolic vision, representing the worldly powers that rise against God's people. It exercised authority in measured ways, speaking and acting with influence over many. The vision was clear, yet gentle, framed not as chaos but as a lesson in the persistence of opposition in human history. The second beast came from the earth, small and subtle in its movement, yet with 2 horns like a lamb and speaking like a dragon. Its task was to persuade and perform signs to lead many astray. John's vision softened its appearance so that it seemed more like a warning than a threat, a dreamlike reflection of deceit and false influence that always seeks to draw hearts away from truth. Even here, in the midst of symbolic conflict, John was reminded that every plan of opposition is under God's oversight. The dragon gave power to the first beast and allowed the second beast to operate, yet John saw that the Lamb's victory was already assured. The child who had been caught up to God's throne was secure, untouched by the chaos, and the woman remained protected in the wilderness. Every act of opposition was contained within the orchestration of divine purpose. The vision did not move with fear or panic, but with measured motion, like waves rising and falling along a quiet shore, showing the unfolding of history under God's control. John's eyes then turned to the multitude of saints, those who hold fast to the testimony of the Lamb and the Word of God. They endured patiently, keeping their faith even as challenges rose like shadows on the horizon. Their endurance was a quiet testament to God's care. They were not triumphant in pride, but in trust, aware that every trial, every challenge, every opposing force was already included in God's plan, and nothing could separate them from His protection. The vision shifted gently, and John saw the final confrontation, not as a violent battle, but as the ultimate resolution of the tension between good and evil. The dragon, the beasts, and all forces opposing God's work moved toward their appointed end. Fire and divine judgment fell, but in the calm of the vision, John perceived it as a cleansing, a restoration of order rather than a scene of terror. The dragon was cast down, the beast subdued, and the saint's endurance was recognized. The Lamb stood at the center, victorious, radiant, and unshaken, holding the fullness of authority and love. In the vision, John noticed how the heavens rejoiced. Angels sang, not in loud clamor but in gentle praise, their voices soft as flowing waters, mingling with the prayers and songs of the saints. Every act of protection, every victory of the Lamb, every endurance of the faithful was acknowledged in harmony. Even the fall of the dragon and the defeat of the beasts were framed as part of a larger, peaceful orchestration. The story unfolded with purpose, teaching John that God's victory is assured and his care is constant. John's heart was drawn to the symbolism of the woman and the child. The child represented hope, new beginnings, and the eternal promise of God's kingdom. The woman, clothed with the sun, symbolized the faithful community nurtured and kept in safety. Even when opposition arose in dramatic forms, their position was secure. The Lamb's victory ensured that no matter the trials, no matter the shifting powers or deceitful influence, God's plan moved forward with perfect order. The vision lingered in John's mind like a soft melody. The colors of the sun, the shimmer of the stars, and the gentle contrast of shadow and light all contributed to a sense of calm reflection. The dragon, though present, became a part of the landscape of the vision, its movements measured and contained. The beasts rose and moved, yet their rise was a note in the larger symphony orchestrated by the Lamb. Each element held meaning, teaching lessons about faith, endurance, protection, and ultimate victory. John saw the saints' response to these visions. They were steadfast, holding the testimony of the Lamb, their faces serene, their hearts quiet. They were not fearful of the dragon or the beasts, but confident in the presence of the one who had already triumphed. The Lamb's victory was not distant or abstract. It was present, real, and sustaining. In every moment of the vision, John understood that the faithful would continue to endure, nourished by God's love, protected by his power, and guided by his wisdom. The child, caught up to God and to his throne, radiated calm authority. The woman remained clothed with the sun, her crown of stars shining gently, a reminder of guidance, care, and divine protection. The dragon's opposition was contained, symbolic rather than destructive, a vision John could contemplate in the safety of heaven's perspective. The beasts, though active and imposing in form, were part of the divine order, illustrating the interplay of good and evil under God's sovereignty. John marveled at the harmony of the vision. Even in conflict, even in opposition, the overarching story spoke of security, endurance, and hope. Each element had purpose and place. The woman, the child, the dragon, and the beasts existed within the rhythm of God's plan, a divine choreography that ensured the Lamb's triumph and the safety of the saints. The scene was filled with movement, yet the motion was gentle, flowing like a river across the landscape of heaven. Colors shifted softly, light refracted across the heavens, and John felt a deep sense of peace. Every figure, every symbolic image, moved in harmony with the will of the Lamb. The vision was vivid but not frightening, intense but calm, a serene tapestry of divine orchestration. Angelic voices rose once more, blending with the prayers of the faithful. The melodies were tender and persistent, a constant reminder of the connection between God and his people. The dragon and the beasts, though part of the narrative, remained bound within the vision's calm parameters. The child's place at God's throne and the woman's refuge in the wilderness reinforced the central message. God's protection and the Lamb's victory are real, enduring, and sufficient. John's contemplation of the vision extended into every detail. The stars around the woman's crown shimmered like distant beacons, reminding him that light always shines even in dark or challenging times. The movements of the dragon and beasts illustrated the presence of opposition in the world. Yet their containment within God's plan reassured him. The endurance of the saints, their steadfastness, and their worship offered a gentle echo to the heart. Faithfulness is preserved, and peace is found in trust. The Lamb remained at the center, a constant of radiance and calm authority. Every vision John witnessed reflected a world in which the forces of good and evil coexist temporarily. Yet the ultimate outcome is already assured. The woman, the child, the dragon, the beasts, and the saints all played their roles in the larger story, a story of divine orchestration, protection, and victory. The vision gradually expanded to show the continuity of this divine plan. Streams of light traced the movements of the child and the woman, linking them symbolically to the saint's endurance. The dragon's presence was counterbalanced by heavenly hosts, angelic figures who moved like gentle currents, ensuring order and protection. The beast's actions were framed within a tapestry of divine purpose, reminding John that even apparent chaos exists under the care of the Lamb. John marveled at the depth of meaning within the vision. Each symbolic movement, each detail of the celestial landscape, each act of opposition or endurance carried significance. Nothing occurred outside God's hand. The Lamb's victory permeated the vision, assuring John that despite challenges, opposition, and trials, the faithful are safeguarded. The interplay of imagery, light, and motion painted a scene of peace, hope, and reflection, showing that divine purpose unfolds with precision, calm, and care. John's vision continued with a solemn rhythm, a quiet unfolding of divine purpose. He saw 7 angels, each carrying a golden bowl filled with what was called the wrath of God. Their movements were measured and deliberate, each step graceful, as though they were performing a sacred rite, not in haste or chaos, but in calm obedience. The bowls glimmered softly in the light of heaven, their contents shimmering like molten gold yet held within the containment of gentle order. The first angel lifted his bowl and poured it upon the earth. John watched as the scene unfolded in calm imagery. The earth was touched, and yet it was not chaos or terror that filled his vision, but the picture of transformation. Symbols of disruption came softly, like ripples across a pond, reminding John that divine justice flows to restore balance and bring truth to fulfillment. The imagery of rivers and lands responding gently to the bowl's pouring suggested a cleansing and renewal, a movement of the world toward harmony under God's design. The second angel poured his bowl into the sea. John saw the waters respond, a third becoming as blood. Fish and creatures within were affected, yet the scene was not painted as cruel or violent. It was symbolic, a dreamlike depiction of purification, showing that even the deep and mysterious parts of the earth are within the reach of God's restoring hand. The water rippled and glowed, shifting colors softly, as if reflecting the solemnity of the act. Each movement was purposeful, a visual representation of God's justice at work, carried out with precision and care. The third angel poured his bowl upon the rivers and springs. The waters became bitter, and many drank and suffered because of it. Yet the vision conveyed more than pain. It spoke of awareness, of awakening, of the necessity of recognition and attention to God's truth. John perceived it as a gentle admonition, a dreamlike moment to reflect upon the human heart and the need for guidance. Streams flowed with purpose, currents moving as though guided by an invisible hand, demonstrating that even judgment carries meaning and leads toward renewal. The fourth angel poured his bowl upon the Sunday. Its heat intensified, yet it was not scorching in a way that caused fear. The vision showed how the elements of creation respond to God's will. The sky glowed, the sun's light became more vivid, illuminating the earth with intensified brilliance. It was a reminder that all creation is in harmony with God's purpose, and that even overwhelming forces, when seen through the lens of divine orchestration, carry the imprint of intention and care. The soft imagery of sun and sky offered a sense of awe rather than terror, showing that divine justice works to correct, refine, and restore. The fifth angel poured his bowl upon the throne of the beast. The kingdom was enveloped in darkness, symbolic of the absence of truth and the lack of alignment with God's will. John watched as the shadow moved like a soft veil, not as terror but as a reminder that deception and rebellion cannot endure before God's ultimate authority. The scene was calm yet striking, a lesson wrapped in imagery. Opposition to God fades in the presence of his purpose. The sixth angel poured his bowl upon the great river Euphrates. Its waters were dried up, preparing the way for the kings of the east. John perceived this as a quiet procession of events unfolding in perfect timing, the natural world bending gently to accommodate the divine plan. The movement of water, the exposure of land, and the careful arrangement of paths were all symbolic of God making all things ready for the fulfillment of his purposes. Even in a vision that described what could seem like dramatic change, John felt the soothing assurance that every part of creation responds to God's guidance. The seventh angel poured his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came from the temple, from the throne, saying, "It is done." The vision showed flashes of lightning, rolling thunder, and soft tremors across the earth. They were not frightening but symbolic of completion, the bringing to fulfillment of all things under God's watchful eye. John saw the world respond like a living organism, elements flowing into alignment. Rivers, seas, skies, and lands, all reflecting the careful orchestration of justice and renewal. In the midst of these visions, John noticed the reactions of those who had observed or experienced the symbolic consequences. Many acknowledged the truth of God's presence, yet others remained unmoved. The scene was calm and reflective, illustrating that while God's justice touches all creation, each heart responds in its own way. This quiet reflection, woven throughout the visions of the bowls, emphasized the patient and intentional work of God in guiding the world toward completeness. John's attention was drawn to the harmony of the unfolding scene. The angels moved gently, the elements responded softly, and the natural world adjusted as if participating in a grand, divine choreography. There was no fear in John's heart, only the awareness of order, purpose, and the certainty that God's work cannot be thwarted. Every bowl poured was a step in the divine sequence, each vision designed to reveal that the path toward restoration and justice is already assured. He saw the symbolic rivers flowing with new clarity, seas reflecting the light of heaven, and skies filled with patterns of soft illumination. Even as judgment was represented in the vision, it was always in service of a greater balance. John contemplated how the saints, who had endured trials, remained protected throughout. Their prayers, rising like incense from the golden altar, mingled with the flowing imagery of the bowls, intertwining grace with justice, hope with correction, and faithfulness with divine orchestration. The visions of the bowls, though solemn, carried a sense of awe and wonder. Mountains, valleys, rivers, and skies all responded in harmony with the pouring, reflecting the perfection of God's plan. John could see the artistry in the sequence, the precision of the unfolding events, and the quiet resolution of all things in accordance with divine will. Nothing was left to chance, and everything moved with calm purpose. John observed the symbolic finality of the seventh bowl, the culmination of all that had been represented in the previous six. The air seemed to shimmer with the presence of heaven. The earth responded with gentle shifts, and all creation reflected the careful orchestration of God's justice. The voice from the throne, declaring, "It is done," resonated like a deep and enduring note, echoing through the vision as a sign of completion and fulfillment. The bowls had achieved their purpose. The world had been reminded, corrected, and aligned with divine intent. Throughout the vision, John's mind lingered on the sense of hope embedded within the bowl's symbolism. Each scene, while solemn, emphasized restoration. Rivers and seas, skies and lands, even human hearts were shown as responsive to God's work. There was a pervasive feeling of renewal, the assurance that despite disruption, chaos, or opposition, the Lamb's guidance ensures that all things are set right. John saw how even events that seemed severe carried within them the seed of hope, the promise that creation would be brought to harmony. The vision extended into every detail of the natural world. The rivers glistened with clarity after the bowls touched them. Streams reflected the light of heaven, and seas carried the patterns of divine purpose. Skies responded in calm shifts of color and illumination, echoing the measured unfolding of events. The imagery spoke of restoration, correction, and the careful orchestration of justice that moves quietly, without haste or disruption, yet with complete authority. John noted how even the smallest details carried meaning. Drops of water, glimmers of light, movements of winds, and changes in land formations were all part of the symbolic story. Each element reflected God's hand, showing that nothing is outside his plan. The calm and solemn progression of the bowls offered a vision of the world being gently brought into alignment with divine will, illustrating how justice, mercy, and hope coexist in perfect balance. The saints, safe and enduring, observed the unfolding visions. Their faith was affirmed as the bowls poured out, each angel's action demonstrating that God's work is precise and purposeful. The symbolic rivers, seas, and skies reminded them of the gentle yet inevitable correction of all things. Even in the representations of divine wrath, the imagery spoke of restoration and renewal. John saw the harmony between judgment and hope, between correction and the Lamb's constant protection. The vision lingered, showing the continuity of God's purpose. The 7 angels completed their tasks. The elements responded with calm precision, and the earth, sea, and sky reflected the careful hand of the Creator. John understood that the bowls were not a message of terror, but a solemn and serene assurance. God makes all things right. The vision carried a sense of deep reflection, an invitation to behold the orchestration of justice, the certainty of restoration, and the enduring care of the Lamb over all creation. Every aspect of the vision, from the pouring of the bowls to the soft movements of the natural world, conveyed the quiet power of God's plan. Rivers, seas, and skies all moved in response, demonstrating that divine justice flows like a river, measured, purposeful, and restorative. John's heart was filled with the awareness that all things, even those that seemed troubled, were ultimately under the careful, loving, and precise guidance of the Lamb. After the solemn vision of the 7 bowls, John's gaze was drawn to another scene that unfolded like the slow clearing of a storm. The skies grew luminous, and he saw an angel descend from heaven. The angel's presence shone with great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his glory. His voice rang out, not in harshness, but with calm solemnity, announcing, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." The words echoed like soft thunder rolling across valleys, not alarming but resolute, carrying the certainty that a long struggle was finally coming to its rightful close. The great city of Babylon, symbol of pride and corruption, appeared in John's vision. It was not presented with clamour, but with the quiet dignity of truth revealed. Its towers and marketplaces, once filled with noise and boasting, now stood as fragile shells. Its wealth, once dazzling, was shown as temporary, unable to endure before the eternal presence of God. The vision was not frightening but clarifying, as if a mist had been lifted to reveal what was always true, that worldly power and riches cannot stand against the enduring kingdom of the Lamb. John saw kings of the earth looking upon the city, these rulers who had shared in Babylon's wealth and ways, mourned at her fall. Their robes of splendor could not cover their grief, for the power they once clung to had dissolved like sand slipping through fingers. They stood at a distance, gazing upon the city's ruin, lamenting the loss of the grandeur they had admired. Their mourning was heavy, but John perceived it as a necessary release, the recognition that pride and injustice cannot last. Merchants also wept. Their ships, once laden with treasures, fine linens, precious stones, and spices from every corner of the earth, now had no harbour, no city to receive their goods. Their trade had ended, their markets silenced. They remembered the bustling streets, the eager buyers, the golden coins exchanging hands, but all of it had passed. John saw them lifting their hands in sorrow, acknowledging the futility of riches without righteousness. Their mourning rose like a soft wail over the seas, yet it was framed not as despair for eternity, but as the quiet realization of truth long ignored. The sailors and shipmasters joined in lament. They remembered the wealth they carried to Babylon, the prosperity they gained from her abundant trade. From afar they cried, "What city was ever like this great city?" Their voices were filled with wonder and grief, not rage but resignation. The sea reflected their sorrow, its waves rolling gently as though echoing the end of an era. And yet, in contrast to the mourning of kings, merchants, and sailors, the heavens rejoiced. Angels sang softly, and the voices of saints rose in harmony, not with loudness, but with serene joy. They rejoiced because justice had been done, because the oppression and arrogance symbolized by Babylon had finally been brought low. The fall of the city was not only an ending, but a release. It was as though chains had fallen from countless hearts, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from the earth. Freedom had come, and the harmony of heaven celebrated this restoration. John watched as another angel lifted a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, "So will Babylon the great city be thrown down, never to be found again." The waters swallowed the stone, ripples moving outward until they calmed into stillness. This act symbolized the finality of Babylon's fall, the certainty that her pride and injustice would not rise again. The sea itself seemed to rest, reflecting the peace that followed the storm. The vision showed the city silent. The music of harpists, flutists, and trumpeters was gone. The craftsmen's hands were stilled. The sound of mills grinding grain no longer filled the air. Lamps no longer glowed in windows, and the voices of bride and bridegroom were not heard in her streets. It was a city without life, a vision of emptiness that followed the fullness of pride. And yet this emptiness carried with it a strange peace, a clearing of space for something purer and enduring to take its place. John was reminded of why the fall had come. The city had grown rich by exploiting others. Her merchants were once called the great men of the earth, and her ways had led many astray. Her pride had blinded her, and her wealth had become her trust. But now her illusions were stripped away, and truth was revealed. The vision was not meant to frighten, but to teach that what is rooted in pride cannot stand, but what is rooted in God's care endures forever. Heaven's rejoicing filled the vision with balance. While the earth mourned the loss of wealth and grandeur, heaven celebrated the restoration of justice and the freedom of the faithful. Angels and saints lifted their voices in gratitude, their songs flowing like streams of light. The contrast was clear. What the world prized as permanent was fleeting, but what God establishes cannot be shaken. John lingered on the imagery of the storm passing. Babylon's fall was like clouds dispersing after a night of thunder. The rain ceased, the winds quieted, and the air grew fresh. The mourning of kings and merchants was like the fading rumble of distant thunder, while the rejoicing of heaven was like the gentle brightness of morning light breaking across the horizon. The vision carried a rhythm of closure and renewal, showing that God's justice brings peace after turmoil. The angel's declaration echoed again in John's memory. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It was not spoken with rage, but with calm certainty. The repetition of the words gave weight, like steady footsteps on a path of truth. John understood that the vision was not only about a city, but about the nature of worldly pride itself. Anything that rises in arrogance against God will eventually fall, and when it does, freedom and justice will be restored. The imagery of merchants and kings mourning while heaven rejoices offered John a deeper reflection. What the world values most may not be what heaven values. Earthly wealth, power, and luxury can appear dazzling, yet they are fragile, unable to endure the test of eternity. What endures are faith, love, and the Lamb's victory. The contrast was gentle yet profound, a reminder that true richness lies in alignment with God's ways. The silence of the fallen city remained in John's vision for a time. Empty streets, still waters, quiet towers, and extinguished lamps painted a picture of what happens when pride collapses. Yet that silence was not despairing. It was restful, as if the earth itself sighed with relief. Babylon's fall was the clearing away of oppression, making space for the kingdom of God to shine more brightly. The rejoicing of heaven swelled softly, like waves upon a shore. Angels proclaimed that God had judged her who corrupted the earth, and the saints added their voices, acknowledging the truth of his justice. Their songs were not vengeful but grateful, filled with peace that justice had prevailed. It was a victory song, calm and enduring, echoing across the expanse of heaven. John reflected on the imagery of the millstone sinking into the sea. The waters accepted it quietly, ripples spreading outward, then fading into stillness. Babylon's pride and wealth had sunk into memory, leaving only calm waters behind. It was a symbol of permanence, showing that the cycle of her oppression was ended once and for all. In the stillness that followed, John saw the Lamb's presence more clearly. The fall of Babylon made space for the kingdom of God to be revealed without hindrance. The emptiness of the city gave way to the fullness of divine promise. It was as though a storm had cleared the skies, and now the sun shone unhindered, warming the earth with gentle light. The vision of Babylon's fall was not meant to leave John in sorrow, but to fill him with hope. The kings and merchants might mourn, but heaven's rejoicing showed the true perspective. What had fallen was not lasting. What remained was eternal. God's justice was not destruction for its own sake, but the restoration of balance, the liberation of those who had been bound by oppression. The rhythm of the vision carried John into reflection. The city's wealth had dazzled, its influence had stretched far, but it had been built upon pride and injustice. When it fell, the earth mourned its loss, yet heaven celebrated its removal. This gentle rhythm of sorrow and rejoicing, mourning and singing, reflected the natural cycle of storms and calms, of endings and beginnings. Babylon's fall was the ending of corruption, the beginning of clarity and freedom. John's heart was comforted as the vision lingered. He understood that while the world may chase after wealth and power, these things fade. Only the kingdom of the Lamb endures. The saints' endurance, the angels' songs, the Lamb's victory, these are the treasures that last forever. The fall of Babylon was not the end of hope, but the confirmation that hope cannot be shaken. The vision closed softly, the silence of the fallen city blending with the songs of heaven. The imagery of towers crumbling and lamps extinguished was balanced by the sound of angels rejoicing and the gentle peace of justice restored. Babylon's fall was not only the removal of pride, but the clearing of space for something greater. The air felt cleansed, the sky brighter, the path clearer. John's soul rested in the assurance that God's justice, though solemn, always brings freedom, balance, and peace. From the silence that followed the fall of Babylon, John's vision lifted once more to the heavens. The stillness did not linger long, for out of the open sky there came a sight both radiant and majestic. He saw a rider seated upon a white horse, clothed not in fleeting earthly splendor, but in a glory that seemed to embrace both justice and peace. The horse gleamed in purity, its every step steady and sure, as though creation itself welcomed its advance. The rider bore many crowns, not the fragile ornaments of passing kings, but crowns that symbolized authority beyond measure. His eyes shone with a brilliance that reached into every hidden place, not burning, but revealing. His robe carried the mark of triumph already accomplished, for upon him rested the certainty of victory, and his name was one that none could fully comprehend, known perfectly only to himself, a mystery that spoke of eternal depth. Upon his thigh and his robe was written a title that resounded across heaven and earth alike, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It was not shouted, but declared with the kind of still power that no ear could deny. Every angel, every elder, every living creature knew with quiet assurance that the moment of complete restoration was unfolding before them. As John beheld this vision, he saw that the rider did not come alone. Behind him followed a multitude, also upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, pure and bright. They were not armed with the instruments of violence, but rather with the authority given through their closeness to the one who led them. It was an army unlike any earthly host, for its strength was not in numbers or weapons, but in the purity of its cause and the peace of its leader. From the rider's mouth came a sharp sword, not of steel, but of truth, a word that carried power to divide falsehood from reality, injustice from righteousness. It was not a weapon of cruelty, but of clarity. With it, he would strike down the lies that had long enslaved the nations, not through chaos, but by unveiling light. His rule would not be temporary, nor fragile, but firm and just, shepherding with the kind of authority that brings order where there has been confusion and healing where there has been harm. The heavens rejoiced at this sight. What had seemed like unshakable darkness was now giving way to the certainty of dawn. The enemies that had risen so high appeared small before the one who sat upon the horse. The beasts, the deceivers, and all the forces that had opposed God's plan were gathered together, but their power dissolved in the presence of the rider. It was not through battle as mortals imagine it, but through the revealing of his majesty that victory was secured. John's vision showed the nations recognizing the futility of their defiance. The kings of the earth who had boasted in their own strength now stood in awe, unable to deny the greater authority before them. The armies that had once threatened to cover the earth like a storm found themselves unable to advance against the brilliance of the one who rode at the front of heaven's host. It was as though truth itself had stepped into their midst, and no shadow could endure. In the vision, an angel called out with a voice that carried across the expanse, declaring the end of all opposition. The deceiver who had stirred rebellion was seized and bound, no longer permitted to deceive the nations. What had once roamed freely to corrupt and destroy was now restrained, silenced under the hand of divine authority. There was no struggle in this act, only certainty, as though all of creation had long awaited this moment of release. John saw that the rider's robe was dipped in a mark of sacrifice, a reminder that his victory was not of force alone, but of love that had already triumphed. The Lamb who had once been slain was the very one who now came as conqueror, not abandoning his gentleness, but bringing it to fullness in power. Heaven's songs rose higher, not in fear, but in praise, for the story of redemption was reaching its completion. The victory of Christ was not merely over enemies, but over every barrier that had stood between God and his creation. The walls of separation crumbled, and the way was opened for a reign of peace that would endure without end. The rider did not come to crush humanity, but to restore it, to set right what had been broken, to bring harmony where there had been discord. In John's vision, the sight of Christ upon the horse was not overwhelming in terror, but overwhelming in beauty. The light that surrounded him spread outward, touching every corner of the vision until all was illuminated. Even the silence that followed was filled with peace, as though the very air rejoiced in relief. The shadows had lost their grip, and what remained was the steady assurance of a kingdom that could not be shaken. The angelic host encircled him, their voices rising in unison, not in hurried shouts, but in calm proclamation. They sang of his faithfulness, of his truth, of the way he had carried his people through every trial. They sang of his name, a name above all names, one that stirred every heart to bow in reverence. The elders cast their crowns once more before him, laying down their honor at the feet of the one whose glory surpassed every measure. The beasts that had once seemed so fearsome were undone in his presence. Their pretended strength was revealed as weakness, their false authority dissolved like mist under the morning sunday. John described their end with simplicity, not dwelling on violence, but on the certainty of their defeat. The deceivers had no place in the light of truth, and so they were removed, leaving no trace to cloud the air of heaven. The vision settled into a picture of calm triumph. The rider upon the white horse remained at the center, his gaze steady, his presence secure. The armies that followed him did not need to act, for the victory had been accomplished by the one they served. It was a moment of deep assurance, one that whispered to John's heart and to all who would later hear his words that God's plan was not only sure, but perfect in its unfolding. Every symbol in the vision spoke softly of order and renewal. The crowns upon his head were not reminders of domination, but of the fullness of authority rightly held. The sword from his mouth was not a tool of destruction, but the expression of truth that leaves no room for falsehood. The white horse was not a beast of war, but a sign of purity and triumph. And the robe, marked by sacrifice, reminded all that victory had come through love. John's eyes lingered on this sight, knowing that it was not only the end of rebellion, but the beginning of peace. The rider was not merely a conqueror, but a shepherd, one who would guide the nations into harmony under his care. His triumph was not a moment of ruin, but the opening of an age where justice and mercy would walk hand in hand. The heavenly vision continued in song. The voices of angels, elders, and every creature joined together, forming a chorus that filled the air like a river of sound. They did not tire in their praise, for the victory was not fleeting, but eternal. They sang of the faithfulness of the Lamb, of the beauty of his reign, of the hope that now stood unshakable. As John listened, the sound washed over him like waves upon a shore. It was not noise, but harmony, carrying with it rest and reassurance. He knew that what he saw was not only for him, but for every believer who would hear the vision and hold fast to its promise. The triumph of Christ was not distant, but certain, a hope that could steady every heart. And so the rider remained in John's sight, crowned in glory, carrying names beyond number, his eyes burning with truth, his robe marked by love, his title shining above all titles. He was the faithful one, the true one, the Word of God, the King of kings and Lord of lords. And before him all things found their place in peace. The vision that John beheld did not pause in the majesty of Christ's triumph. As the deceiver was bound, restrained, and silenced, the unfolding of God's plan reached into its most tender promise. The rebellion was brought to its end, the judgment complete, and the great moment arrived when all things were made new. John's eyes were lifted, and he saw something beyond the scope of what had passed before. He described it with words both simple and profound. A new heaven and a new earth appeared, radiant with freshness, unmarked by the scars of sorrow or sin. The old had passed away, its pain and its shadows dissolved like mist before the rising of the Sunday. The sea that had so often symbolized distance and division was no more, for nothing would remain to separate the Creator from his creation. As John watched, the holy city, the New Jerusalem, descended out of heaven from God. It was not built by human hands, nor bound by the frailty of earthly stone. It came prepared like a bride adorned for her husband, clothed in beauty, shimmering with purity, radiant with joy. Its descent was not hurried but graceful, as if every movement carried the harmony of eternity. A voice rose from the throne, steady and clear, filling the vision with a truth more comforting than any sound John had heard. The voice declared, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with humanity. He will live with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God." These words were not merely spoken, they seemed to rest upon the heart, soothing it with assurance. Every fear was undone in that single promise, God dwelling forever with his own. And then John saw what this meant. Every tear was gently wiped away, not one forgotten. Death itself was no more. Grief and pain dissolved into nothingness, for the former things had passed away. What remained was life in its fullness, untouched by sorrow, flowing with unending peace. He who sat upon the throne declared with calm certainty, "Behold, I make all things new." These words carried no uncertainty. They were truth made visible before John's eyes. The holy city shone with a brilliance beyond comparison. John described its radiance as like a most precious jewel, clear as crystal, yet glowing with the light of God's glory. Its walls were great and high, not to keep anyone out, but to display its strength and security. 12 gates opened in every direction, each one a single pearl, welcoming all who belonged within. Upon the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, while the foundations bore the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. It was a city that embraced the fullness of God's people, past and present, drawn together in one. The streets were of pure gold, so refined they appeared like transparent glass. Yet the beauty was not in the material, but in what they symbolized. A place where purity, clarity, and peace formed the very ground upon which all walked. There was no temple within the city, for God Himself and the Lamb were its temple. His presence filled every corner, every street, every dwelling. There was no need for sun or moon, for the glory of God gave it light, and the Lamb was its lamp. Nations walked by that light, and kings brought their splendor into it, yet not to boast, but to offer themselves in worship. The gates never closed, for there was no night there. Nothing unclean could enter, nor anything false, but only those whose names were written in the Lamb's book of life. It was a place untouched by corruption, filled only with truth, goodness, and joy. John's vision carried him deeper into the heart of the city. He saw a river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street. It was no ordinary river, but a stream of living refreshment, endless and pure. On either side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its harvest each month, its leaves for the healing of the nations. No curse remained, for the river and the tree spoke of renewal without end, abundance without lack. The servants of God dwelled there, not in distance but in nearness. They saw His face, and His name was upon their foreheads. The vision of separation was gone, replaced by intimacy. Night was no more, for the Lord God was their light, and they would reign with Him forever and ever. The image was not of power as the world knows it, but of shared harmony, of life flowing between Creator and creation without break. John described the city's brilliance with details that filled the imagination with wonder. The foundations were adorned with every kind of precious stone, each layer shimmering with color: jasper, sapphire, chalcedony, emerald, sardonyx, carnelian, chrysolite, beryl, topaz, chrysoprase, jacinth, and amethyst. Each foundation gleamed like the palette of a painter spread across the horizon, a reminder that God's beauty embraces every shade, every hue, every depth. The walls themselves were of jasper, clear and strong, while the city within was of pure gold. It was not a display of wealth, but a declaration of glory. In that vision, John saw not just a city, but the home of God's people. It was a place of belonging, of safety, of joy unbroken. The image of the bride and the Lamb was woven through every description, a union that spoke of love fulfilled, covenant made complete, promises kept forever. The city's every detail whispered of intimacy, of God drawing close and never departing. The voice from the throne spoke again, reminding John that these words were faithful and true. There was no dreamlike uncertainty, no fragile hope, but assurance as steady as the throne itself. It is done. the voice said. "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give freely from the spring of the water of life. The one who conquers will inherit these things, and I will be their God, and they will be my child." These words echoed like a gentle lullaby, binding together every promise of Scripture into a single chord of peace. John beheld the city as it stood complete, shimmering with glory, filled with life. The nations were healed, their wounds restored, their conflicts dissolved. The people walked in unity, not driven by fear, but carried by love. The sound of praise filled the air, not forced, but flowing naturally from every heart. It was a chorus not only of voices, but of life itself, every river, every tree, every stone adding its own note. The Lamb remained at the center, the light that never dimmed, the presence that never faded. All eyes turned toward him, not in fear, but in joy. His wounds, once the mark of suffering, now shone as the sign of victory. His face, once hidden, was now seen openly by all. The people bore his name, their lives reflecting his glory, their hearts at rest in his presence. The vision unfolded not as an ending, but as a beginning. The new heaven and the new earth were not the close of a story, but the opening of eternity. Every longing was fulfilled, every promise kept, every sorrow erased. The holy city, descending from above, became the dwelling of God and his people, a place where nothing would ever again come between them. John's eyes lingered upon the river, its waters glistening in the eternal light. He looked at the tree, its fruit abundant, its leaves stretching outward as if to touch every corner of creation. He heard the songs rising like gentle waves, unending, undisturbed, carrying with them peace beyond measure. He saw the faces of those who dwelled there, each one radiant, each one secure. The vision rested upon him with a calm weight, not heavy, but steady, as though to say that this was not only a picture for him to see, but a promise for all who believe. The new heaven and the new earth were not far away, but certain, already held in the hands of the Alpha and the Omega. And so the vision of the holy city remained before him, glowing with glory, shimmering with peace, alive with the presence of God and the Lamb. The dwelling place of God was now with his people, forever and ever. The vision of the new heaven and the new earth stood as a picture not only of what will come, but also of what is meant to steady hearts now. Revelation, in its whole sweep, was never given to John as a puzzle for the mind alone, but as a source of hope, courage, and faith for the soul. It is a book of symbols and songs, of warnings and promises, but within it rests truths that can shape daily living. One lesson rests in the reminder that God's presence is constant, even in exile. John received his vision on the island of Patmos, far from friends, far from freedom, surrounded by silence and sea. Yet it was in that solitude that heaven opened. This teaches that no place is beyond God's reach. In moments when life feels lonely, when circumstances seem barren, God is near. His voice can break into the stillness. His light can pierce the darkest places. The story invites hearts to rest in the knowledge that even when outwardly isolated, inwardly one is never abandoned. The letters to the 7 churches also hold lessons for daily living. Each message was shaped for its community, yet each speaks across time. To Ephesus came the call to hold fast to love, for truth without love grows cold. To Smyrna was given courage in the face of suffering, a reminder that faithfulness has eternal worth. Pergamum was warned against compromise, teaching the importance of integrity. Thyatira was urged toward purity, Sardis toward wakefulness, Philadelphia toward steadfastness, and Laodicea toward zeal and sincerity. These words speak into everyday choices. They remind each listener that faith is not distant, but woven into work, into speech, into kindness, into perseverance. The throne in heaven, encircled by elders and living creatures, reveals a lesson of perspective. Life often narrows the gaze to immediate concerns, yet John was shown a greater center. The throne is occupied, and it is not by chance or chaos. This vision teaches to rest in the assurance that history is not adrift, nor are personal lives without purpose. At the center of all things sits the Creator, surrounded by worship, governing with wisdom. To carry this truth into daily moments is to find peace when circumstances shake, for one knows that nothing is beyond his sight. The Lamb who opened the scroll teaches the power of humility. The scroll was sealed, and no one in heaven or on earth was found worthy to open it until the Lamb appeared, not as a lion in outward fierceness, but as one who had been slain. The lesson here is that true power is shown not in pride or force, but in sacrifice and gentleness. This shapes how one views strength in ordinary life. It encourages hearts to choose compassion over anger, service over self-promotion, patience over haste. The Lamb's worthiness reminds all that the way of love is the way of lasting victory. The seals, trumpets, and bowls, though filled with images of trial, also carry lessons of endurance. They remind that struggles and storms, though real, are not without meaning. They are woven into a larger design, and God hears the prayers of His people as incense rising before Him. The lesson for daily life is that prayer is not forgotten. Every sigh, every whispered word, every silent longing is gathered and treasured. In times of waiting, in times of trial, the call is to endure with trust, knowing that no prayer fades into emptiness. The visions of the woman, the dragon, and the beasts bring into focus the reality of conflict, yet also the promise of protection. Life often holds battles between what is right and what is false, between hope and despair, between faith and fear. The imagery of Revelation assures that these struggles are not unseen. The woman is sheltered, the dragon is restrained, the beasts are exposed. The lesson here is to remember that even in times when evil seems loud, God is stronger still. This gives courage to face challenges, to resist despair, and to cling to truth. The fall of Babylon reminds hearts not to place trust in wealth, pride, or power that passes away. The city stood in splendor, but fell in a moment. Merchants mourned, kings wept, but heaven rejoiced, for oppression was ended. The lesson for life is gentle but clear. Build not upon what fades, but upon what endures. Simplicity, kindness, and faith carry greater weight than riches. In the rhythm of daily choices, one may learn to treasure relationships, compassion, and trust in God over the fleeting shine of material things. The rider upon the white horse reveals the assurance of Christ's final victory. His triumph was not achieved through force as humans imagine it, but through the authority of truth and love already accomplished. The lesson here is to live with confidence, not in one's own strength but in His. It is a reminder that no matter how strong the shadows may appear, the light is certain. This shapes how one meets difficulties, not with despair, but with calm assurance that the story ends in peace. The new heaven and the new earth, with its river of life and tree of healing, teach the lesson of hope. Hope not as wishful thinking, but as a sure promise. The picture of God dwelling with His people, wiping away tears, removing death, and making all things new is not distant. It is the anchor for daily life, giving reason to persevere, to forgive, to continue in love. Every act of faithfulness, every gesture of kindness, every prayer offered is part of this greater story. Another lesson of Revelation is the rhythm of worship. Throughout the visions, songs rise again and again. The elders fall down, the angels cry out, the creatures never cease to say, "Holy, holy, holy." Worship is not confined to a temple in the vision, for in the New Jerusalem there is no temple, only the presence of God and the Lamb filling all things. This teaches that worship is not merely an activity but a way of being. Daily life becomes worship when done in love, in gratitude, in faithfulness. Every word spoken with kindness, every task performed with care, every thought turned toward God becomes part of the song that fills eternity. Revelation also teaches about patience. The unfolding of seals, trumpets, and bowls did not happen all at once, but step by step. The vision unfolded slowly, with pauses, with silence, with waiting. In this is the reminder that God's timing is different from human timing. For life, this means learning to rest in trust, even when answers do not come quickly. It means recognizing that delays are not abandonment, and silence is not absence. Patience becomes not a burden, but a pathway to deeper trust. There is also the lesson of endurance joined with hope. Again and again, the vision spoke of those who overcame, who endured, who held fast. Their endurance was not in their own strength, but in their trust in the Lamb. For daily life, this means that endurance is not about striving alone, but about leaning into God's faithfulness. It teaches to remain steady in love, even when challenged, to remain firm in truth, even when pressed, to remain gentle, even when misunderstood. The imagery of light in Revelation also carries meaning. The city had no need of sun or moon, for God's glory gave it light. This light was not harsh, but gentle, illuminating without shadow. For life, this teaches that true light comes not from human achievement, but from God's presence. It invites hearts to walk in that light daily, to allow His truth and love to guide decisions, to scatter fear, to bring warmth into the lives of others. The river of life and the tree of life offer further lessons. The river flows clear, unending, from the throne, reminding that all life springs from God's presence. In daily life, this speaks of renewal, the constant refreshment of His Spirit. Just as a river never runs dry, so His grace does not fail. The tree, yielding fruit in every season and leaves for healing, speaks of abundance and restoration. This invites hearts to live as branches of that tree, offering kindness, forgiveness, and peace to others. In every act of healing words or gentle deeds, one mirrors the tree's purpose. Revelation also carries the lesson of belonging. The gates of the city bear the names of tribes and apostles, embracing the fullness of God's people. This speaks of unity, not division. In daily life, the lesson is to live in harmony, to see others not as strangers but as companions on the journey. It teaches to embrace diversity, to value the unique gifts of each person, to find strength in community. Another gentle truth is the permanence of God's promises. Over and over, John was told that the words he heard were faithful and true. For life, this lesson is simple yet profound. God's promises can be trusted. They do not fade, nor do they fail. This allows one to live with confidence, to let go of fear, and to rest in peace, knowing that His word is sure. The vision of the Lamb also teaches about identity. Those who dwell in the city bear His name upon their foreheads. Their identity is not in failure, not in achievement, not in fleeting status, but in belonging to Him. For daily life, this means finding identity not in the shifting standards of the world, but in the unchanging love of God. It teaches hearts to rest in being His, to let that truth shape choices, attitudes, and relationships. The picture of victory through gentleness stands as one of the greatest lessons. The Lamb triumphed not through force, but through sacrifice. This turns upside down the world's measure of greatness. For life, this means valuing humility, cherishing kindness, and living in service. It invites each person to see strength not as domination, but as the courage to forgive, the patience to endure, the willingness to love. Revelation's imagery of final peace also offers comfort for times of loss. The promise that God will wipe away every tear, that death shall be no more, that sorrow will pass, is a balm for the grieving heart. It teaches that mourning is not the end, that hope is not extinguished by death. It reminds that every tear is seen, every pain is noted, and healing awaits. This shapes how one comforts others, with gentleness, with compassion, with words of hope that reach beyond the present sorrow. The book also teaches vigilance. The churches were urged to stay awake, to keep their lamps burning, to hold fast to what they had received. This lesson for life is clear. Remain attentive, guard the heart, nurture faith, and do not let it grow cold. It is a call to mindfulness, to live each day with awareness, with gratitude, with purpose. And perhaps most deeply, Revelation teaches that love endures. At the heart of every vision, behind every symbol, through every promise, is love. Love that created, love that redeemed, love that will dwell with humanity forever. For daily life, this is the greatest lesson. To love God, to love neighbor, to let love guide every word, every act, every thought. John's vision, though filled with grandeur, ultimately points to the simplicity of trust, hope, endurance, worship, patience, unity, and love. These are not distant truths, but present realities. They are not abstract ideas, but daily practices. Revelation, then, is not only about what is to come, but about how to live now. To live with love, to endure with faith, to hope with certainty, to worship with gratitude, to wait with patience, to trust with peace. These are the lessons drawn from the vision of John, and they are lessons not meant to burden, but to lighten, to free, to comfort. So the vision continues, not only in the pages of Scripture, but in the lives of those who carry its lessons into each moment, each choice, each day. The Lamb reigns, the throne is secure, the river flows, the tree bears fruit, and the promise of God's dwelling remains. The visions that have unfolded leave the heart filled with a stillness that words can scarcely describe. They carry within them a quiet reassurance that all things are held in perfect balance, that every story, no matter how stormy, is gathered into the embrace of the one who reigns above time itself. It is as though the final strokes of a great symphony have sounded, not with clamour or unrest, but with a lingering note that softens into silence, a silence filled not with emptiness but with presence. In this silence the soul rests. The message that whispers through the story of Revelation is not one of fear, though the imagery has been vast and mighty. It is not one of despair, though struggles and trials have been shown. Instead, it is a song of deep hope. It is the assurance that the same hands that shaped the stars and call each by name are the hands that hold every moment of our lives. It is the comfort that no shadow is greater than the light of the Lamb, no sorrow stronger than the joy of his promise, no end that is not also a beginning. One can close the eyes and picture the Lamb, gentle yet triumphant, whose presence brought the scroll into the flow of history, whose voice calmed the heavens and filled the hearts of the saints with courage. This is the center of Revelation's gift, the radiant certainty that Christ is near, not far. He walks among his people, as he did among the golden lampstands. He speaks to hearts with tender words, lifting burdens, reminding them that love endures. He is faithful, and in his faithfulness, every fragment of the story holds together. Rest comes from knowing that justice is not cold or distant. Justice in the vision is wrapped in mercy, flowing with the rhythm of a plan that makes all things whole. The bowls, the trumpets, the seals, and the thrones are not random or harsh. They are part of a tapestry, like threads of deep colour woven into a larger design. From close up the weave may seem tangled, yet from the vantage of heaven it forms a pattern of perfect order, and in this order lies peace. Think of the city, the New Jerusalem, its walls gleaming, its gates open, its streets alive with the brightness of gold, not as wealth, but as light. There is no need for sun or lamp, for the Lamb himself shines as its lamp. Rivers flow clear as crystal, trees stretch with fruit for every season, leaves are given for the healing of nations. These images sink gently into the heart, like cool water poured over tired soil. They remind us that what is promised is not merely an end to struggle, but the flowering of life in its fullest, the renewal of all that has ever been broken. To reflect on this is to feel the weight of weariness lift, the burdens of the day, the questions that linger without answer, the fears that sometimes cling close, all are met by this vision of a dwelling place prepared, a home filled with laughter, light, and belonging. The Holy One dwells with his people, not at a distance, but among them, as a friend, as a father, as a constant companion. There is no more mourning, no more pain, no more night. The former things pass away, and in their place comes something that cannot fade. It is not only the grand vision that brings comfort, but also the quiet invitation woven through the entire story. Revelation speaks softly to the weary heart, saying that endurance matters, that faith, though small as a seed, has power to last through storms. It reminds us that perseverance is not in vain, that love never goes unnoticed, that even a whispered prayer rises like incense before the throne of heaven. Such prayers are gathered tenderly, treasured, and answered in their time. This assurance allows the spirit to rest deeply, knowing that nothing is wasted, and so the heart can rest in the thought that the journey is not random but purposeful. Each step, each season, is gathered into the story of a God who writes with care and never loses his place. The letters to the churches were filled with reminders to return to first love, to hold fast in trial, to remain faithful, to be awake and alive. These reminders echo still, gentle as lullabies, reminding the soul that even in times of weakness or wandering, the shepherd calls and gathers his flock. His love is unbroken. The imagery of crowns, robes, and songs of the redeemed are not merely symbols but whispers of identity. They remind the listener that each person is known, each life has worth, each saint is cherished. The vision of elders casting crowns before the throne is not one of loss, but of joy, for they give back in love what was first given in grace. To see this is to remember that our lives, too, are crowns offered in love, gifts placed into hands that are already scarred with sacrifice. There is a rhythm that beats gently throughout Revelation, a rhythm of worship. It begins at the throne. It echoes through the living creatures. It rises with the voices of elders. It swells with the multitude no one can number. It is a rhythm that never falters, steady as a heartbeat, carrying creation forward. This rhythm does not call for strain or effort. It calls for rest, for surrender, for letting go into the stream of adoration that already flows. To join that song is to find peace, to find oneself carried by a current stronger than fear, deeper than doubt, gentler than any lullaby. As these visions are allowed to settle into the mind, they bring with them a perspective that softens every worry. The trials of the present are seen in light of the eternal. The pains that once seemed heavy are placed against the promise of healing. The uncertainty of tomorrow is met with the certainty of a kingdom that has no end. This shift is like watching storm clouds drift apart to reveal a clear horizon. The heart loosens its grip on anxieties and instead rests on the assurance that the Lamb reigns, and in his reign lies peace. It is a peace that does not deny the presence of struggle, but embraces it with hope. Revelation never hides the reality of conflict, yet it continually anchors that reality in victory. The dragon may rage, the beasts may rise, Babylon may boast, but their time is short, and their power is not final. What lasts is the faithfulness of Christ, the endurance of his people, the promise of a world made new. In remembering this, the spirit learns to breathe more easily, to relax into the certainty that goodness is not fragile, but eternal. This closing reflection lingers on that very certainty. It does not rush or demand. It simply rests. It invites the listener to let the images unfold like gentle waves lapping at the shore, one after another, steady and soothing. The Lamb, the throne, the city, the river, the tree, light, song, healing, belonging, love. These images circle around like stars, always present, always shining. Each one draws the mind into a deeper quiet, until even the thoughts grow still and the heart simply listens. The message is not about escape from the world, but about renewal within it. Revelation is not a call to fear the unknown, but to trust the one who knows the end from the beginning. It is not a story of chaos, but of order, not of despair, but of joy. Even the most complex visions, with their layers of meaning, resolve into a single truth. God is with his people, and his love never fails. To carry that truth in the heart is to carry light into the darkest night. And so, this gentle reflection becomes like a quiet blessing, not a command, not a demand, but a soft assurance. You are safe, for the shepherd watches over his flock. You are loved, for the Lamb laid down his life and yet lives forever. You are not forgotten, for your prayers rise as incense and your name is known. You are part of the great song that will never end, a song of victory, a song of rest, a song of love. The beauty of Revelation is that it leaves space for peace. It draws the mind upward, not with weight, but with lightness. It sets before the heart a picture of eternity, not as something distant, but as something already beginning, already unfolding. The kingdom is here, even as it is to come. The throne is set, the Lamb is worthy, the city is prepared. To rest in this knowledge is to rest in the very heart of God. Let these thoughts linger softly, like the final notes of a lullaby that continue in silence after the music ends. Let them cradle the soul in assurance, not of what may be lost, but of what will always be gained. Hope, comfort, victory, love. These are the threads woven through Revelation, and they are the threads that hold every heart steady. May your heart be at peace, and your mind be at rest. You are safe, you are loved, and the promises of God surround you like a gentle light. Sleep well, dear friend, and I look forward to being with you again in the next video.